Question for you. Do you think that Christians can have infallible beliefs about the saved state of another Christian?
Another Christian? No. For their own, yes. Westminster clearly delineates that.
Oh, okay, so if I heard you right, so you're saying you think that you can be assured of your own salvation to the point of saying, yeah, I couldn't, it's impossible.
Right.
Yeah. But not other people.
Yeah, I couldn't know that.
What makes you think that?
I may have a high degree,
You said don't be beta.
Yeah.
Oh,
that's what I said. That is what I said.
Questions for Jimmy.
Yes, it's not me for kids.
Jimmy.
Alright.
Or as my wife says, Jimby. Yeah, that's always, I think it's an interesting question just because you get so many different responses from other Christians.
I see some of these people that were Protestant for
Here we go.
Forever.
So, Dr. Bart Ehrman,
And they Roman Catholicism. You're like, they're probably the people that know them were like the last person they would think would make that switch.
I'm having a really hard time. I don't know what it is, Matt. I'm sorry, man. Your microphone, like.
I'm not sure if my new earphones, because I don't think it has a microphone in it. Hearing aid sounds going to do that.
I hear Matt perfectly fine.
Okay.
Well, maybe it's just me.
Jimmy's just having his Down syndrome kicking. You're going to have to work with him.
That's very possible.
Because I hear him fine, too. It's weird. He's just like,
okay.
I can't hear you. But Matt said no, he doesn't, because he thinks you can know your own personal state better than you can know someone else's.
Oh, okay.
Well, I was using an illustration of, guys that were once Protestant for like 10, 15 years of their life, maybe 20, and then they shifted to Roman Catholicism. I figured probably people know them, probably thought, oh, these people are saved, and then they make a huge shift. Done it or not, after that long time, so. They couldn't be their judge, so until they apostatize, but, or just say, well, you're in, and then if, you're to go away, then, yeah, that's where the, anathema comes down. But, that's why I just, hold the Romans 8 and 1 John, his spirit testifies with our spirit that we are the children of God. We know where our hope and salvation lies, and nothing else. We can't be persuaded otherwise. Because the justified are going to be glorified. You say justified. Yeah, some of those won't be glorified. They're still justified, yeah.
I see. Oh, I hate this thing.
Those justified were called, the called were predestined, the predestined were foreknown.
Jimmy, do you have a comeback to that? So Jimmy takes a different position, but he's going to remain quiet.
Well,
that's what I guarantee.
I think it's a hard topic. So, okay. Sorry, I just needed to check something. It's hard, right? Because why is it hard? So it's difficult because I think the scripture does not go into great detail as to the psychology of how you learn those things. But, like, for example, I think it's kind of difficult. The real difficulty is reconciling all the different information in the New Testament. So, like, on the one hand, there's all these passages where we're supposed to test the spirits, right? And so from that, and then you can also say, like, well, and not only that, but you've personally experienced people who've fallen away. You can point to historical examples of people who have fallen away, but who seemed on point. You can point to examples of people whose faith is ambiguous. I mean, I don't know what your opinion is about Rabbi Zacharias, for example, but like there are people who would just outright claim that he's an unbeliever, and so there's there can be ambiguity. And then there's places in Scripture where it's like Paul. I'm trying to remember who he condemns, right? But there's like one place that I'm vaguely remembering in the epistles where he's like, don't be friends with that guy. He screwed me over. blah, blah, blah. But on the other hand, right, Paul addresses specific people as believers in the New Testament. It's difficult to think that they could fall away, given that Paul addresses them that way. And the bigger issue is that Paul doesn't make any indication that his knowing that is on the basis of some kind of like divine oracle or something like that. It just seems like he's using his natural Christian faculties.
Hey, Jimmy, I have a question.
What's up, man?
My question is, since you're, given precept, what do you say to those that appeal to evidences? And they say, the apostles didn't say scriptures like this self-authenticating source just to people. They said, look, the God gave people evidence. So why shouldn't we prefer some kind of evidentialist stance because it's more biblical?
So I think that Paul could read his audience. So I think it depends on who you're talking to. Some people are going to be, for various psychological and epistemological reasons, more open to citing some kind of specific case of evidence, and that will be good enough to convince them to throw away their unbelieving point of view. But that's not always the case, and so I don't know why you keep using the word precept. It's so cringy. But
tradition, Jimmy, tradition.
I lost track of what I was saying. Got interrupted there. Literally nothing happens until you start a call. Talking about people have different background beliefs. They come at it from different positions. So Paul and the other apostles will be reading where they're at to the best of their ability. Oh, I was going to say that in our culture, we're more often dealing with people who are comparable at say philosophers in quotation marks at the Areopagus. And Paul's argument there was very different than to like point to prophetic fulfillment or historical veracity or something like that. His argument there was essentially that people were demonstrating in their behavior the census day. They were demonstrating the Christian idea that God is present in the world, made himself known to them, but that they were misinterpreting this sense that they had, which is evidenced by the various idols and the openness of their epistemology to just any kind of wind of doctrine. That's more of the crowd that we are often talking to today is a crowd of people who think that anything is possible unless there's some kind of specific scientific or logical particular that says otherwise. And if there is a God, he's got to be reconcilable with that system of thought. That's very much like the Greeks that Paul is addressing, and not like, for example, when he goes to the synagogue and talks with them about the Old Testament.
So what you're saying is that it's not merely for the slight bit of data, it's like something much broader. Is that wrong to say?
I don't think that's what I'm saying, but I think that's true too. I think you'd have to give maybe a specific example, because it sounds like maybe you're thinking of somebody who would go to Acts 17 and sort of misinterpret it as Paul arguing the general historic resurrection case. But what I'm saying rather is that Paul is a smart person, so he knows he should use arguments that are going to be persuasive depending on his interlocutors. He's not going to use Jewish persuasion with people who are working on the concept of a Greek universe. And he's not going to appeal to the inconsistency of Greek philosophers to make an argument to the Jews. You want to reason in a way that's oriented toward the person you're trying to persuade or convict. And I'm saying the places where the places where the apostles did offer evidence, other than like things like miracles, are usually not places where they're talking to the kind of crowds that apologists are addressing. Like it seems to me the very nature of apologetics is that it's usually not, it doesn't need to be, and it's not always this way, but it's usually more oriented toward ivory tower discussions than your average man on the street.
Another question I was going to ask you is, usually you deal with a sort of objection to knowing whether we can know God's intentions. You've heard this from like the Angstrike crowd before. What would you say to something like that?
It depends on the nature of the conversation. Like, where is this coming from? But like broadly, that kind of skepticism kind of faces two problems. One, there's no case to be made for that skeptical outlook about God from a Christian epistemology. So it just doesn't really work very well as a reductio. It doesn't work very well as an internal critique. And it fails twice over because if you were skeptical about acquiring knowledge of somebody else's intentions because of what they do, then that could be applied to everyone else, and as a result, it could be applied to you. You would just be in the dark about everything. Be a sort of an eternal prisoner of yourself.
Yeah, I also think that the fact that, weirdly enough, it's the means by which you have revelation is slightly different than like in Christianity than like in Islam, given like this organic theory of inspiration. Yeah, but basically, since you have the organic theory of inspiration, you have a context by which, it's not just like some utter divine transcendent context or something like that.
Can you maybe clarify that? I'm not following, to be honest. I'm not sure what you're...
Well, basically, God doesn't, so to speak, he comes down to us. Speaks on human terms.
Yeah, okay, so maybe like Islam does this, but maybe to like make clear what you're saying, if you go back to like Greek mystery religion, when you go to the oracle to get your prophecy, a couple things are going to happen. First of all, this is going to be like a drug-induced ritual. It's not in a normal way. It's not like having a conversation like you in a normal way. This is a in terms of religion, at best, this is a specialized ritual, but it's normally you would associate being drugged with your mental faculties being rendered unreliable. These people weren't studied. They the oracles that lived there. It's not like God had come down. It's not like Zeus had come down, had sex with them, and their son was a sign that Zeus was giving them authority or anything like that. Not that Zeus has that much authority in the universe anyways. Right? So their lives don't speak to having like... This is just kind of a job. It's like palm reader that happens to be so popular. Lots of people are going there. It's like a televangelist, right? A televangelist is kind of analogous. But regardless. So you have a person high on drugs. Their life doesn't indicate like any kind of divine presence. This is just a person. This is a palm reader. And when they give you a prophecy, it's going to be the kind of ambiguous stuff that makes for Greek legend. What is that? What is that story of? It's like, I think the prophecy is like the city will fall, and the Greek assailant attacks the city, and it was the wrong city that was going to fall, or something like that. Right? They're entirely ambiguous. They're not really... They don't give you any relevant information except, something bad's going to happen. Well, yeah, that's more. But that's just very unlike the way God talks with us, is what you're trying to say. And Islam kind of has that problem too. God can be arbitrary, whereas in this universe, God created language. He created the human mind. He's designed those things top to bottom, and he has condescended to us. He has come into the universe to write a book. That's pretty dang human to do something like that. It's pretty dang human to have conversations with people in their own native tongue and tell them what's going to happen in certain discrete terms, putting our conversation together. The reason that relates back to your question about the whole intentionality thing is that, so there are some views of revelation where a being is so alien or so arbitrary, does things that we have no categories to make the right associations, to make the right inferences. And that's just not the case with God. God sent his son to become human and walk among us. He has talked and interacted with other people the same way that we do them, just without any sin. Jesus is the perfect image of God, both because he is the Son of God, so he images the Father, but also because he is the true human. He is perfectly human without any kind of stain of sin, human brought to its full fruition. You can't get any more intimate a being than that.
was going to ask you about omnipotence. So there's like a dispute that Daniel had with somebody over some philosopher, I forget. I think it was Malpass, on omnipotence. And I remember you having a very particular way around the problem. I just have to remember what the problem was. So my question is, what was the problem, and then what was your solution?
Oh man, dude, if you're going off of my memory, we're gonna have a sad start, my laddie. I do not remember.
Was it a vacuity objection?
Yeah. So there's a yes. That's essentially one of the problems is. So when you go to define omnipotence, let me put this in a way that's explicitly in terms of my position, and then we can work from there to see why other people disagree and do whatever they're doing, right? So, like from my point of view, when we go to define God's power, we're going to talk about what God can do and why we should consider him almighty or something like that. Give him these praises. There is an underlying issue of how to relate God's powers in creation with God's power in himself. Because God doesn't need the world to exist. He exists quite apart from the universe. But what is he like without the universe? I mean, how do you have power if there's not any of these causal things to interact with? And so I think a mistake is commonly made, very similar to the way an Augustinian answer tries to get around the Euthyphro dilemma. A mistake is made to try to come up with some metaphysical concept of power that would unify what God is like outside of creation and what God can do in creation. But I think that's wrong-minded. I think instead, what a Christian wants to do is recognize that God isn't a creature. He's the creator, and so he will have some kind of power that's unique to himself and isn't shared with anything else. And when we see the various causal abilities that things in creation have, that agents, for example, can do, we can carry out our wills in various ways. That's a reflection of the original. That is what God has made to say something about what he's like, to express his original power, but not to limit or delineate his original power. It tells us something of what he's like, but we aren't able to then treat what we can do as if they are boxes, as if they are the lines of a concept within which to fit God's power. And there's an emptiness problem because you want to define God's omnipotence in a way that relates to particular things he does, that doesn't ignore his other attributes, so on and so forth. But you also don't want to limit God's power to something that could be, to something that requires the kind of metaphysical goings on and rules that are in our universe, that are part of creation. I think what ends up happening, I'll take a huge leap in the conversation here. One objection to omnipotence is that some definitions, so God can do whatever he wants to do, and or God can do whatever it's in his nature to do. And the vacuity objection is that this is so circular that we can put weird content in for what God wants to do or what God's like. And it fulfills this omnipotence, but intuitively strikes us as not what we're trying to say originally. So hence the Makir objection, where we say, God only ever wants to scratch his ear. And he's omnipotent because he does whatever he wants to do. And in fact, you might go farther and say that, well, humans do what it is in their nature to do. And so they must be able to do that. So how is that really any different than what humans can do? I don't think it's wrong to say that God can do what it's in his nature to do. But that kind of definition is going to need to be filled out by other attributes. It's the kind of concept of omnipotence that is really saying that when you think about God's power, think about how he's more than and not limited by the kind of powers that are in the universe. But that's very vague, right? And so I think people want something more clear. I think a really good definition is that in contrast to all of the agents that are in creation that God has made, God's intentions are a sufficient condition of what is intended. So the very nature of being a creature is that my plans and my purposings are all instrumentally limited to the things around me. I'm part of the universe. I have a physical body. If I want to grab this, if I want to bring this water cup to me and sip it, I can't, telepathy it. I have to reach out my hand, right? And even if I could use telepathy would then just be another nomological mechanism in the framework of the universe. We would live in an X-Men universe, but that would just make me an X-Men, right? And that wouldn't make me omnipotent. You think, right? Clear away all the middle ground. What makes God interesting, what makes him unique, is that he doesn't need any middle ground. When he says, "Let there be light," he's the one person who, by announcing that there is this truth, acts as its truth maker in and of himself. He can be the ground for something being the case just because he wants to be and says he will be. Whereas other people, human beings, angels, animals, when they have plans and try to carry them out, there are all these, even if they have some kind of guarantee that it's going to happen, it's always guaranteed through things outside themselves. Those guaranteed through things distinct from, independent of their intentions. I don't know if that captures it. I'll just be clear. I'm not pretending that cites what Malpass has said or addresses a specific question that he asks or even repudiates his objection. I'm just kind of exploring the topic because I don't remember specifically what the objection was, but I feel like that gives you kind of an overview of what I think is the problem. I think when unbelievers come to omnipotence, the two common mistakes are A, to misplace the creature-creator distinction, and B, to try to think about God's omnipotence without also considering his other attributes. That's just not how Christendom has done theology proper throughout the eras. We have always tried to understand one attribute in terms of the others. We've always tried to understand the attributes in terms of God's being infinite. Or maybe we haven't always done that consistently, but that's always been the right idea.
I had some questions related to Malpass.
Go ahead.
For it.
So, I've been very interested in his critique of tag. I think he brings some good objections, and I'm curious if you're familiar with it.
Yeah, I had Malpass is a really good guy, so he let me come on his YouTube channel and talk with him.
Hey, Jimmy, you're cutting out. Are you outside?
No, I'm not outside.
I think this is Truthy. You outside, Truthy?
No, I'm fine.
Oh, okay. All right.
Maybe it's so your mic is catching some of your breathing, bro. But did you hear what I said? Did I break up too much?
No, it's good. So you are familiar with his critique where he goes through the Michael Jordan objection and the two worldviews objection. Yeah.
It's been a long time since I've read that article, but vaguely, I mean that's a very popular style of response to that kind of argument, I think.
Yeah, so I'm kind of interested in just how you would respond to some of this. So you would be wedded to the claim of all, right? Because I feel like most of the objections about tag center around this idea of necessary precondition, aka all non-Christian worldviews. So you are wedded to this idea, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm sure you're familiar, but just to remind, this idea of the Michael Jordan is essentially taking induction and treating it like deduction, I've beaten every opponent thus far, therefore I am the best.
Yeah. So the problem is that induction will never get you to the epistemic status that you want for the claim, right? Like maybe you can say probably
Exactly.
all. Yeah. So I think that that's a fair critique if that's what Bonson meant by the analogy. For a couple of reasons, I don't think that's what he meant. But let's suppose that let's suppose that we're not interpreting Bonson for a second. Let's suppose that just somebody gives that analogy, right? Here's what I would think. I agree that the most intuitive reading of that, I don't like the analogy for that very reason. That it seems like what the person is saying is that because I hold the record, I always will. Well, I mean, no, not really. That doesn't really follow. But what if the person means something like this? Michael Jordan has had this huge record of winning. He stands as the best basketball player right now. And so he claims to be it. And somebody on the sideline says, yeah, but there could be somebody better. Okay, has that person beaten them at basketball? Right? They're not really playing the game, is I think the point of the analogy. The point of the analogy is to say that in the analysis of different interpretations of reality, there are... Okay, give me 1 second. I don't know what this person is doing. Give me 1 second.
And, just fill up airtime. Hello, truthiness.
Yeah, how's it going, man?
It's going good, dude. It's going good. What's your views?
I'm a hardcore atheist materialist.
Gotcha.
Truthiness is basically Dr. Manhattan.
Your mic is enormously loud, Marvelous.
Oh, sorry. Is that better?
Mildly.
Is this better? Dang it. All right, give me a sec. All right, is this better?
I wish I could say it was, but it's all good.
Okay.
So sometimes you just got to be loud. Embrace it.
It sounds like the mic is inside of your mouth.
Okay, let me move the thing away a little bit better. How about this? Is
Yeah,
it better?
that's better.
Okay. It practically was inside my mouth. I was basically almost eating the mic.
I had a feeling.
Yeah, the thing. Look, Jimmy thinks he's real deep with his Mel Gibson Hamlet profile picture. Jimmy, where you
Lord
at?
knows what that means. Your PFP implies.
Well, mine's just a wizard from a video game. Okay.
Exactly.
All right, I'm back momentarily. I don't know.
Yeah, we can hear you just fine.
Jimmy, what's up, man?
What's up, Lottie?
Yeah, no, not Lottie. Okay, I'm 6 years older than you. Okay, I revoke your ability to use that word.
Okay,
son.
Marvelous.
All right.
I've got a serious critique here. If you can keep your jovial nonsense till later, please.
Well, geez, okay.
Step aside, sir.
There goes the philosophy of emptiness.
Okay, so what I was about to say is just that when you are analyzing these interpretations of reality, it's not really a critique to say, yeah, but it's possible that there's another one. Because that's just to throw an empty claim into space, as it were. Right? Someone could just as easily claim, no, it's not. Right? One judges what is possible. One judges whether it's possible that there is an alternative worldview on the basis of one's worldview. And so, unless already has an actually accurate worldview, unless someone already has a sufficient interpretation of reality on the basis of which to say there is a possible alternative, it's not a case against the argument just to say that there is.
Okay, so what you're trying to say is that modality, and exactly specifically logical modality, is going to be relative to the worldview.
Yeah, your beliefs about it. That's right.
Okay, but so it's still cutting at a notion of how one would go about demonstrating the claim of all, specifically the claim necessary, meaning all others are insufficient. And what he's trying to push on here is that induction simply can't do it straightforwardly. The idea that you have this unbeaten record, you bring up, if someone says on the bench, well, maybe it's possible you aren't. And Jordan says, bring on my next opponent. That this method, just logically, straightforward logically, is not a way to conclude that one is actually the best.
Yeah, I just don't think that that's so. What I've suggested here is that there's an alternative understanding of the analogy that's not Jordan wins because so far he's held the title, and therefore he can discount what the person said. Rather, what I'm saying is, I think the analogy is to point out that there's a basketball game, and you can't beat Jordan's status as the best basketball player so far by suggesting that somebody else could beat him. That's not playing basketball. And so by analogy, when we're doing arguments over what's going on, is Christianity true, right? Or is something else true? It does no good to just assert on the basis of nothing that there's possibly something else. Someone, like I just said, right? Somebody could just reply, no, there isn't. And it would be just as founded. You found the basis of your judgments on worldviews, on epistemology, blah, blah, blah.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that induction is a way to get to deduction. That we can simply conclude that on the basis of no one ever being able to beat Michael Jordan, that we can therefore conclude he is not just currently the best, but the best, full stop.
No, I don't think that's the point of the analogy. I think the point of the analogy is not to demonstrate the full case that the limitations of possibility stop with Christianity. I think the nature of the analogy is to say, when somebody says, yes, but it could be different, or yes, but there could be another worldview that explains all this, the point of the analogy is to say, well, that's just a baseless claim. It can just be dismissed at the outset.
My understanding was that he was trying to show the three methodologies by which someone, a proponent of tag, can actually substantiate the claim of necessary and all others. That's what I understood because there's the Michael Jordan, the two worldviews, and autonomy, right? Those are his three ways that he thinks you can go about trying to prove the claim.
Yeah, I guess maybe I just disagree. I mean, I'd have to go back to the passage to maybe make a good case from the explicit text. But at that point, we're, I think, more arguing about what Bahnsen thought, or maybe about how what's his student's name? Gosh.
Butler?
Yeah, about how Butler thought.
Well, but it's my
That we
understanding
are-
that this is not this Michael Jordan analogy is Malpass's, as far as I understand it. But either way, it does sound like what you're committed to here is saying that there is something sufficient about having an unbeaten record, and the fact that someone claiming that it's logically possible there could be a future opponent unknown to us that could challenge. It seems like what you're saying is that that is actually sufficient to ground a claim of best and no other.
What I'm saying is that the claim to... I'm saying something slightly different. What I'm saying is that the claim that there could be another is falsified by the fact that there's no reason to believe it, right? You make judgments about what is possible and what is not on the basis of bigger ideas about how we know what we know. So just in case a person doesn't have a good idea of how we know what we know, doesn't have a good take on the world, and so doesn't have a way to substitute the Christian religion, he's not in an epistemological position to make judgments about whether it's possible or not, apart from God, to live or yeah.
So okay, so you're saying the person is not in a position to make these modal claims, and that it also. I'm curious if you think that this commits you to some version of denying the problem of induction.
Commits you to some. I'm sorry. What is the? What would be the thing that commits you to?
You're saying that the way that we figure out what's possible, at least this is what I'm hearing you saying, is that the way that we figure out what's possible, or that like some notion of logical modality, is actually through an inductive method.
Well, sure. I mean, if I say, yeah, that seems to me. Do you think that's not the case?
Well, I mean, one of the hugest problems is the problem of induction. So if we're saying that, I mean, this is what cuts in the philosophy of science against so much of scientific realism. I mean, the idea that basically what you're saying is, okay, well, white swan, white swan, white swan. It's not possible for there to be a black swan, and anybody that says it's possible for there to be a black swan, well, how do they account for that modality?
But I'm not sure if that's right.
Well, it sounds to me like you are addressing someone who thinks that modality is established merely inductively, or that whether it's possible that all this stuff can be going on apart from Christianity being true is established inductively, or that Christianity's necessarily being known is established inductively. And I'm not saying I have not said anything. My whole point was just that in talking about the Michael Jordan analogy, I think that's basically, I think the proper interpretation of that is that it's an ad hoc response. It's saying that a problem with the nature of the objection is that the person who makes it is canceling themselves out. They are self-silencing. They remove their very ability to prefer to make that claim, however you wish to put it. But that's, I don't think that's the only thing to say about the question, because Malpass is I think Malpass is the crux of that article is to say that the argument never gets to showing that only Christianity is possible. And I think the all worldviews thing, right? Yeah. So I think there's let's see if I can keep them all on the track in my head while I'm looking at this as I'm at work. But it seems to me that there's maybe like 2 or 3 problems with that. One is the ad hoc problem, in order for it to be knowable that it just shows the door. Sorry, 1 second. There we go.
And just to clarify, what I'm trying to establish here is he presents a trilemma of sorts. So I'm trying to figure out which horn of the trilemma you take and which ones you think are maybe false or something like that.
Can you remind me what the trilemma is?
So it's going to be that the way that you prove the claim of necessary and all others other than Christian worldview is either inductively by beating every opponent you could possibly bring to the table to show that it's very unlikely that one will come and defeat, right? That's one horn because he thinks that that's just substituting induction for deduction. The second option is going to be two worldviews, right? The disjunction, some version of A or not A, not A, therefore A. He also has problems with that. Or it's going to be something about trying to say all worldviews use autonomous reasoning.
Okay, yeah, so it sounds like I think what I went on to defend all those years ago was the third option or something like that, but I can't really remember. But yeah, we're both in agreement that the inductive horn is dissatisfactory for lack of the word it's a bad horn. It's bad.
Okay, so you say Michael Jordan is not how I'm proving it, right?
I wouldn't say that Michael Jordan is not how I'm proving it. I would say we have different interpretations of what Michael Jordan is doing in the argument.
But okay, let me phrase this differently. Induction is not how you would prove it, correct?
No, I would not say that because philosophers in the past have all been beaten. That's what makes the case of the argument.
Okay, let's move on to two worldviews. So his second horn is this idea of two worldviews. The typical disjunction, either a disjunction from, like an A or not A, not A. But Malpass wants to say that it's not going to be the negation of a contradiction. He wants to say that it actually should be just a simple disjunction, A or B, because he thinks that this grants far too much to the tag proponent, right? He thinks that all you're really showing is A or B, and therefore still would need to demonstrate A or C, A or D, right? Right back to the Michael Jordan. So how do you respond to this?
So I think something about horn 2 and 3 is that I think they're kind of mutually entailing. So I think the right way to conceive of the two worldviews thing is to say this, that the Christian has these certain claims about reality. He says there's this creator God and he's revealed himself in the world. Whenever people live their lives, every time they're having a philosophical conversation, or even when they're making PB&J sandwiches, somewhere in their heart of hearts, they're always aware that the sandwich is a created sandwich, that they are a God-imaging creature, and so they are always depending on that knowledge, hidden away in the recesses of their minds, wherever it is, to go about living their daily lives, to make their decisions about how to go to the grocery store and buy the jelly. But the way but the unbeliever wants to say that that's not true. The unbeliever wants to say that he does not need God to know things, or more specifically, he does not need knowledge of God in order to know things. He does not need this Christian revelation. It's not obvious to him that God exists. So he's not sensing guilt before an angry God or anything like that, right? These are things that the basic concept of Christian theology. He wants to. Where's Jeff? Okay, hopefully that worked. I don't know if that worked. Sorry, I'm new here, Jeff, so I don't know how to get in. shoot, where was I? Oh,
We're
yeah.
talking
So,
about. Yeah, go ahead.
okay. Yeah. So the unbeliever wants to deny these things, right? Well, the very nature of saying that some given worldview is false is going to require having some variety of justifying the claim. There's some variety of story about what reality is like, or if you're a postmodernist, right, that there's not really any such answer to the question, and that's just the nature of things. And so when we're talking about these worldviews, the funny thing is that you've got kind of a or not a situation, but the point is that it's the way that you go about justifying not a that makes all the difference. It's the way that you go about repudiating Christianity's claim that involves all of these unique worldviews. The worldview that Hegel came up with, or that I don't know, another random person, the worldview that Muhammad believes. These are all stories about what reality is like that give you motivations for thinking that Christianity is false, and they all have in common this one element of saying, yeah, you can reason, you can make moral judgments, you can have a meaningful life, etc., etc., apart from, independent of this Christian theology. It doesn't need to be true or known for this stuff to go on, because I've got this worldview over here that's doing all the work. So sorry for that being so long, but all that to say, right, like, it just seems to me like maybe I disagree with the way Malpass classifies worldviews, because all of these other worldviews are going to have in common this claim to autonomy, that is, an independence of life from the revealing and providential work of God. And the way they're going to justify that is in terms of a particular worldview. So it will have unique elements, but it will also always have this essential core as well.
Now, just so I understand here, are you trying to say that the one thing they all have in common is the rejection of Christianity?
Yeah.
Okay. And are you also, so Malpass defines a worldview as just like the sum total of all beliefs that the person holds, whereas, traditionally I've heard worldviews cashed out as like an epistemology, a metaphysic, and an ethic. Now, whether or not those two are cognitively synonymous, I guess I pose that to you.
No, I think it's kind of strange to think that my belief, for example, that my computer is gray is part of my worldview, at least in the sense that we want to debate about them.
Yeah, I tend to agree. So you would say there's some sort of like, such as your metaphysic, your epistemology, and your ethic that would actually be the foundations of which we could say everything else is built off of, such as the belief that your computer is whatever you said.
Great, yeah. No, I think, that's exactly.
Okay, so still the question remains, which is this two worldviews issue that Malpass brings, which is that, are you trying to do a or not a or not a, not a, or are you trying to do, are you willing to accept that he says it should actually be a simple disjunction and be A or B?
I would say neither. So I would say that you're always going to have A or not A, and that not A is going to be justified by something like a B or a C or a D and so forth. And that makes the argument inherently ad hominem, right? It's going to be at the man. The person who is saying, I have the power to think apart from Christianity. Okay, we are addressing that particular claim when we make the argument that autonomy is not available to you. It's not reasonable to take that horn of the disjunct.
Sorry, if I can just interrupt here. This issue of autonomy, I do think is better dealt with separately, because he rejects some notions that I think you have about autonomy. So he's going to want to say that in virtue of Bonson actually dealing with Islam and atheism separately, he brings up the famous quote from Kant that if the dogmatist brings you 10 proofs, you can be sure he has none. For if he had a proof that was sufficient, what's with all the others, essentially? So what I think is, I just wanted to point out here that I think is important is that he's going to say that something like Islam could still have all these notions of theonomous, right, as opposed to autonomous. So I think it's a separate issue. I think I'm more curious about if you're trying to say that it is A or not A, but that not A is justified by some worldview B, some worldview C, some worldview D. I'm not sure how that really gets around his objection here.
Okay, because what Malpass is trying to say is that you can't. The Christian wants to prove that all worldviews. Let me put it this way, right? The Christian wants to prove that all worldviews are false, and then me and Malpass shake hands and say yes. And Malpass is saying, okay, how does he do that? And the hidden part in parentheses, I think what Malpass means is, how do you give a demonstration suitable for anyone who can understand it? But I don't think that that's the goal. I think that the very nature of something like a transcendental argument is that you take into account your given interlocutors, and you are proving to those particular members of the audience that there is no worldview other than Christianity.
But isn't that the Michael Jordan?
No, because you're not proving to some number of people that Christianity is the best or the best so far. You're proving not to everyone, but to a particular group of people that Christianity is the only thing out there, right? So the thing that's limited is not the scope of the worldviews addressed. The thing that's limited is the scope of the people addressed.
I mean, I'm not sure that even really engages with what Malpass's critique is. Malpass's critique is that the claim is that Christianity is the necessary precondition, meaning it excludes all other worldviews. And if what you're saying is the way that you demonstrate that has to do more with just the people you're speaking to at the time, it would still beg the question as to or it would still ask the question as to, okay, but which method are you going about doing that by? Some inductive method, some disjunction, or trying to claim that all worldviews have autonomy or something in common?
So I think that I would just investigate maybe some philosophical question and see how a given person, I don't know if you're a Christian or not, but how a given person answers the issue, and maybe suggest that there's this or that problem with an unbelieving outlook on what answer they have to proffer, right? And the point of saying that the reason this is a stepping stone is because it leads to the point. Well, hey, look, it wouldn't be possible to live life if you didn't have a solution to this problem, but you don't have a solution to this problem. Not on your worldview.
Yeah, and that's one of the instances of knocking down a single worldview. And let's say you do that 1 billion times in a row.
Well, I don't think so, right? Because although I'm knocking down the beliefs of a single person, it is on the basis of those beliefs that they think anything else is possible other than Christianity. So if I've knocked down those beliefs, the only consistent thing for that particular person to do is accept Christianity.
I mean, this is kind of orthogonal to the critique, though.
That may be true, but to be honest with you, like I said at the outset, right, I haven't read that in quite a while. While I can interact with the ideas and I have a basic gist, I think, of what Malpass had said, I can't cite examples from the article.
Well, I mean, to be clear, it's not a super sophisticated critique. It's really straightforward. It's like you either are proving the the grandiose claim by induction, or you're proving it by a disjunction, or you're proving it by showing all other worldviews share a common property.
I don't think the latter two horns are incompatible, but regardless, yeah, what I'm saying is for horn 2, the idea that you press the matter in terms of a disjunct, I think it seems to me the point you're making is, how do you go about including all options in the disjunct?
Exactly.
Well, by addressing in my particular audience members the criteria of the options they have.
It sounds like what you're saying is that a particular audience member's notion of modality, meaning what is actually possible in terms of all possible, is the target of your refutation, to just exclude whatever they may think is possible, because you want to say that possibility is across various different people's worldviews, will be some relativistic notion.
Yeah, that sounds vaguely. I'm not sure I agree exactly, but that sounds pretty close to what I'm saying.
Now, on Christianity, obviously, like, in terms of possibility of other worldviews, like, it's going to be cashed out very differently than, let's say, an atheist like Malpass's notion of what is truly possible, right? He's committed to this idea that there is potentially an infinite number of worldviews.
Sorry, give me 1 second. I gotta talk to this guy over. 1 moment. All right, can you hear me? Do I sound?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Cool.
Interesting. Okay, so I would have to think about that. Because, okay, but let's say you're talking to Malpass, right? Because on Malpass's notion of logical possibility, there's a potentially infinite number of worldviews because of how he defines worldview. Some long series of every belief that you hold. Now, I know that you rejected that, and I agree that a lot of this depends on semantics, but let's say you're talking to Malpass. He's got this very broad notion of possibility.
Well, I think the problem is, right, that part of what is in contention with Christianity and unbelief, with believers and unbelievers, is that for a believer, God is the limits of possibility, right? He's the one who's controlling what's possible and what's not. It all comes back to his character and his will. So, put yourself in my shoes, right? From the perspective of a Christian, somebody who's trying to assign the limits of possibility or the limits of necessity, who's not familiar with God, would be like a person trying to play Monopoly who has never read the rules, never played with anybody who has, he's missing the key piece of the puzzle, right? That's the most important element to have to determine what's going on in the universe, that this or that is possible and that over there is not. And so, take, for example, the way you classify worldviews, right? So Malpass classifies them differently. Okay. I haven't talked to Malpass in a long time, but I imagine something of the problem is just that, like, why the question becomes, why should we prefer, this classification over that one?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, to answer that question, you're going to have to give some kind of story about why, you've come to be in possession of the right knowledge to make the right judgment about it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I agree. I think there is always going to be this issue on atheism of, well, I've got some proprietary semantics here. And, this person over here has another notion of what X means. And in virtue of what ought we take either one as normative? And presumably there's a million other interpretations of what X means, notions of good, notions of modality, whatever. So, yeah, I mean, I think that's a reasonable objection, sure. But nonetheless, if the goal of tag is to persuade, I'm curious how you would go about proving your case to Malpass with who has these proprietary semantics and this broad notion of possibility.
I'd have to know more about where he's at, how he goes about thinking about those things, right? We have very different ways of informing our beliefs about what's possible and what's not. And it would not be possible to give him a good argument without knowing where he's at.
I mean, it's my understanding he's your typical naturalist, right? Thinks science is a good way to know things. No reason to believe any supernatural things. Probably some type of Bayesian analysis. Yeah, but it's pretty standard.
I don't think so. I thought at one point I remember two articles that these is like I think of Conan, the Grey Dawn of History. I'm already terrible at memory, but I vaguely remember two articles. One was like about how Malpass thought it was perhaps available to people to ground normativity, moral oughts in which philosopher was it? There's an argument, if you something like if you've made this agreement with someone, you ought to keep your contract or something like that. And there is a particular hypothetical in the premises of the argument that it persuades some people to believe that you can ground oughts that way. And there was another article where I vaguely remember Malpass talking about Platonism, and he was kind of playing with the idea that there is some kind of non-natural realm of, I don't remember exactly whatever it is that's doing the metaphysical work, something. So I don't know. I don't really know where he's at. I wouldn't feel comfortable.
Okay, well, maybe that's the case. So I'll try to move on to this third one to be done with my series of questions here. But before I do, just to finish up with this second one, the two worldviews objection, would you agree with him that it's a false dilemma to say A or not A, not A, and that it's and that it's actually more like A or B, and that it's a claim of a false, like the atheist is claiming a false dilemma here. He's saying that given A or B and the negation of B, A does indeed follow. But that's given that it's just A or B. And that's the whole thing in contention.
See, I don't remember that being his major. Maybe that does. Maybe he does bring that up, but I remember the major thing with the whole disjunctive. Like, are you familiar with like Matt Slick's tag? Because that was like to a large extent what Malpass had already.
That's a separate article that Malpass has dealing specifically with the Slickian rendition. That's
right. So, and it could just be I'm mixing them up, but to my memory, like the main objection is that you have to have this not be a simple conject, because otherwise you run into some kind of fallacy down the road, and I can't really remember what it is, but
and what do you say to the Kantian quote that he brings about if the dogmatist brings 10 proofs, you can be sure he has none?
Yeah, so I think he's kind of quoting Kant through Butler, because that's the beginning of Butler's article. I don't actually agree with Kant on that. I think that it's actually one of my criticisms of Bonson, and even more so of Butler, that they try to see, they make out tag like it's some kind of standalone concrete set of premises. It's like a magic spell, right? If you can just work out the magic spell, you'll have solved every apologetic encounter that you ever come across. They kind of treat it like that, and I don't really think that that's what transcendental argumentation is, even for Van Til. So I would just take that as one of the soft points of departure for me and Butler, and maybe even softer, but still with Bonson.
So it sounds like you are committed to trying to say that it does need to be A or not A.
Yeah, I don't know that I would formalize it that way, but what I said years ago is the same thing that what I'm saying now is basically the same thing I said years ago, which was that the alternative idea is autonomy, right? That Christianity is true, or you've got some kind of justification that you don't need Christianity, which is just the idea that you can live life apart from this story. And a further, so like a problem, I think the reason why one would frame the argument this way, right, between Christianity and these various justifications of autonomy, you got the Hindu autonomy, you've got the Buddhist autonomy, you got Taoist autonomy, you got whatever. And the reason to put it that way is that you can point out later on, because this often comes up in conversations like these, you can point out later on that, look, insofar as your worldview doesn't support the claim to autonomy, it's not sufficient. Insofar as it doesn't justify the claim where it attempts to support it, it's not sufficient. Right? You gotta have not just the claim of autonomy. That's a necessary condition to be combating Christianity. You're in trouble if your worldview's open. But even after you've made the claim of autonomy, you've now got to have some way of justifying that claim. And so I think that's the reason why, like Bonson elsewhere, Bonson has a trilemma in one of, I think it's in a footnote in his Van Til's apologetic, and he basically says that with respect to human experience, there's just three options. You can say that it's the Christian God and his gospel that makes sense of human experience and why everything is the way that it is. This is all about Jesus, so to speak. You can say that you have no idea. You have no idea why you can know all these things and why, an orange tastes wonderful and, certain heinous acts are terrible. It just is the way it is. Or you can provide a concrete example worldview. But the middle position is just self-refuting. One would not be in a position to say that it could be possibly not Christianity if one does not know what the world is about. Sorry, that was long. But...
Yeah, no, it's fine. Okay, so okay, let's get into autonomy, and then this will be the end of it. So, what he wants to say about autonomy is that in order to group all worldviews, non-Christian worldviews, into autonomy, they're all going to need to share some contradiction, namely like the same contradiction, right? And he brings various examples. Like first, he wants to claim that something like Islam isn't in some autonomous epistemology. They're going to claim a theonomous epistemology as well. So he thinks evidence of this is why Bonson treats a separate argument in the Kantian sense for Islam, right? So that he's going to say right there, there's examples of theistic systems that don't suffer this charge of all other non-Christian worldviews being autonomous, therefore it fails on that condition. But he brings other ones too, such as the worldview with one belief. And he anticipates the objection, oh, well, that's not going to account for intelligibility. But he claims that Tag is missing a sufficient account of what the minimal conditions for intelligibility would be.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you. I don't remember. I don't remember enough about the terminology that's being used between Malpass and Butler to even comment on what are they talking about when they're talking about the minimal conditions of intelligibility. I take it that these are the necessary conditions of knowledge, something like that.
Yeah, however you're cashing out intelligibility.
Yeah, so I think that I think the reason they don't set that up is because the nature of transcendental critique is inherently internalistic, meaning not internalistic in like a justification sense, internalistic in the sense that it's inherently ad hoc. It's inherently aimed at, or excuse me, not ad hoc. Bird flying overhead. It's inherently ad hominem, right? It's inherently pointed at an opponent's criteria of intelligibility, right? So whatever an opponent's view of knowledge is, whatever they think the necessary conditions are, you have kind of three things you can say. You can say, here's the things you believe about what's necessary for knowledge that I disagree with. Here's the things that I think Christianity and you share in common. And then here's the things that Christianity says that you don't agree with. And then you can argue from there about, whatever those are. But, I mean, just in the nature of the case, people disagree about what the necessary conditions of knowledge are. For a Christian, it's going to be divine revelation. And I say that very, very broadly, but I just mean that it's the idea that you're created as a human being, right? So you've got the right constitution, and your experiential environment, the basic stuff that you are perceiving every second, is communication from God. It's an instrument of revelation.
Would there be anything else you'd add to that account?
Not off the top of my head. I'm
No. I think that's good, actually. I think that's good. But now, so how do you answer the objection that there's other theistic systems that would claim this type of revelation from God is likewise necessary?
I'm sorry. Give me 1 second. I gotta think of this guy.